Welcome to Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills, where we present clear thinking on confusing topics in challenging times. On our last show, we circled back to some of the podcasters and journalists who have been covering the Tech Broligarchy that's been taking over San Francisco and attempting to take over the nation. And we added some folks who've been researching the tech and real estate money that has flooded the zone in the city by the bay. Today, we have folks back on for a part two. We may even have a part three because there is so much to cover and there is so much relevance to the rest of the nation and even to the world, because some of the big names that you hear about, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Mark Andreessen, a lot of these folks, they all got their start in the San Francisco Bay Area. A lot of them still have homes here and are very much influencing Bay Area politics. So let me introduce our guests and we'll get right into it. First, we have Keen Chukwunetta on the board of the Phoenix Project, which is an organization that is tracking campaign funding from these various high-tech folks and real estate folks and any kind of folks. Keen is a seasoned political strategist and organizer, currently as senior campaign coordinator at Jobs with Justice SF, and has deep commitment to labor rights and political advocacy. From directing field operations for congressional campaigns to spearheading voter engagement initiatives, Keen's expertise has been pivotal in shaping progressive campaigns and policies across California. Jeremy Mack is also with us, executive director of the Phoenix Project. Mack is a dedicated advocate for transformative public policy with a master's from the University of San Francisco and a dual major from Bates College, specializing in restorative justice and ethical urban development. His work spans policy research, community organizing, and impactful academic work on the Better Neighborhood, Same Neighbors initiative in East Oakland. Kevin L. Jones is also with us, a multimedia journalist and audio producer who's worked at some of the most notable news outlets in the Bay Area, including the San Francisco Chronicle, KQED, and KTVU for 2 decades now. He currently hosts the leftist news show and podcast Doom Loop Dispatch with D. Scott Miller. D. Scott Miller is the former managing editor of the East Bay Express, former associate editor of Oakland Magazine and Alameda Magazine, columnist in residence at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art's Open Space, advisory board member of Nocturne's Journal of Literary Arts, and contributor to several newspapers, websites, and magazines. Miller is founder of the Afro-Surreal Arts Movement through his publication of the Afro-Surreal Manifesto in the San Francisco Bay Guardian from May of 2009. Welcome, everybody.
Hey there. Thank you for having us again.
Yeah, thanks for coming again. I wanted to start with the relevance of what's happening in San Francisco, the East Bay, and the greater Bay Area. We call it the San Francisco Bay Area, to not just the nation, but to the rest of the world. And I was going to start by reading a passage from a Guardian, I think a U.S. Guardian article that was written, I believe, in conjunction with Mission Local, which is a local San Francisco news outlet. And the article is called Inside Tech Billionaires' Push to Reshape San Francisco Politics, and then a, quote, hostile takeover. The Guardian and Mission Local unravel gray money network flooding progressive city with conservative cash. This is back from February of 2024, so it's been over a year. And this is why we're checking in to see, after the Trump election victory, what's happening now? Have things intensified? You know, what is happening in this area, and where is everything going at this point? And what can we learn from how things are going in San Francisco in the Bay Area? So let me read this. This was from a year and a half ago, the beginning of all of this, or actually probably started before this, but here's I think a good summary. In a way, it's a story as old as time. Ultra wealthy figures pouring a flood of money into city politics in an effort to shape the way it is run. Still, the political influence machine that tech billionaires and venture capitalists have recently built in San Francisco stands out for its size and ambition. A new analysis of campaign filings, nonprofit records, and political contributions by The Guardian and Mission Local reveals the extent of this network, which is using its financial and organizational muscle to push the famously progressive city into adopting policies that are tougher on crime and homelessness and more favorable to business and housing construction. In the past 6 years, prominent tech and venture capital leaders, including the hedge fund manager William Oberndorf, the billionaire investor Michael Moritz, the cryptocurrency booster Chris Larson, the PayPal co-founder David Sachs, the Y Combinator CEO Gary Tan, and the Pantheon CEO Zachary Rosen have invested at least $5.7 million, this is in 2024, into reshaping San Francisco's policies, according to the analysis of public data. Because not all of their donations are publicly disclosed, the sum of their contributions may be far higher. In a solidly democratic city, they have joined forces with traditional business and real estate elites in an effort to oust some of the most progressive leaders and undo its most progressive policies. To achieve those goals, they have created a loose network of interlocking nonprofits, dark money groups, and political action committees, a framework colloquially known as a gray money network that allows them to obscure the true scale of their involvement in San Francisco municipal politics. Okay, that was a mouthful, but I think a good sort of like an introduction to what's happening in San Francisco. And my first question, I mean, I sometimes think about like a tale of two cities. You know, we have San Francisco and we have New York. New York is going in a distinctly different direction with the election of progressive Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani. And San Francisco is going in the direction of, you know, a Levi Strauss heir and also a billionaire with all of his billionaire crypto AI buddies. So my question to you, and we'll start with Kevin. Kevin, here's the question. This is a question for all of you to answer if you feel like, you know, there's still more to add after you've heard others answer. Why is this relevant to the nation? And why is this relevant to the world? If someone in Europe or in Oceania or in Africa were to, you know, what is the relevance here from San Francisco? You do a whole podcast, Doom Loop Dispatch, on this with D. Scott, and so you must think it's important.
Yeah, well, I think a big part of it is that, for one, the right wing sees San Francisco and the Bay Area as this progressive stronghold, and any kind of way to embarrass it, as an example, you know, what's the narrative we keep saying? Progressive cities are failing. We have homeless problems because of progressive policies. We have policing problems, crime problems because of progressive policies. We're a punching bag here, you know? I mean, that's the thing too. With New York, it's a big deal because it's such a huge city where they thought, you know, they ruled the roost and, you know, they could do whatever they want. Well, now they're seeing the progressive pushback here in San Francisco. They're seeing the wins, you know, they're seeing the victories with already having to get rid of Chesa Boudin, the school board, getting a mayor that's very pro billionaire because he comes from that class. Yeah, I really think it's just because they can hold it up as a trophy, you know? And also, too, I mean, it does help that basically we are a city that hosts way too many billionaires. We're basically billionaire run at this point. And so they want to take it over because they want to make, you know, their home, make it their home and get what they want out of it. You know, they're not used to being told no. I mean, there's that study at Cal that showed that basically when you're that rich, you know, you kind of lose connection to people and reality, and you become just like a giant spoiled brat, basically. And that's kind of what you're seeing here, is that they want what they want, you know? I mean, they want, you know, the network state. They want the separation of them, but from everyone else. You know, they're going to have the Reds do what they want. You know, that's the police and that's all the people that support fascism, etc. And they want to punish anyone that, you know, cares about the poor or doesn't like their policies. So if they can continue showing that they're winning and that they're making a difference, I mean, that's the thing now. The surprising narrative is, oh, Daniel Lurie's doing such a great job. I mean, San Francisco is back. And I'm not seeing that. I'm still seeing serious issues with homeless people around, drug addiction, you know, and losing support for the programs that actually work because, again, they're against that right-wing narrative. So, yeah, I think we're just the perfect punching bag.
So when you say Reds, you mean Republicans, or do you mean like the Grays that Balaji Srinivasan talked about?
Well, I do mean the Reds, but yeah, the Grays are the techie billionaires, the techies. They see themselves as kind of in charge of both, you know,
Okay.
or at least telling each side what to do.
Yeah, and I think it behooves us to remind our listeners, if you haven't listened to the last episodes on San Francisco and San Francisco, Where Art Thou? I'm going to post those in the show notes that you can link to. It's really important to understand what's happening, I think, in San Francisco. But there's this term called the network state. A lot of this has been revealed by journalist Gil Duran, who has a Substack called the Nerd Reich, which is about how a lot of these tech billionaires have designs on creating their own sort of like cities that have walls and are protected by police that they live in within the United States. And in some cases with their own, they don't want to be governed by any kind of municipal government. We'll see about the feds. Right now they're in league with the feds, so we'll see. But so Keen, let's go to you. I don't want to forget about you since I don't see your face. What do you think is the relevance here in terms of what's happening in San Francisco? Why should people around the world and the United States be concerned?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And thanks again for having us. I think the way that I sort of conceptualize it is that it's not so much that it's specific to San Francisco, and maybe Jeremy can get a little bit more into their like specific motivations for San Francisco being where it seems that this started. But I think the truth is that their ambitions are global, right? I mean, the network state isn't bound by any one country or place or anything, right? It's this sort of international thing that's happening. And I think that if their ambitions are global, it's on us to like the work that we're trying to do is sort of to like contextualize that and make sense of it so that those of us here on the ground being impacted against it can actually fight effectively against it.
Yeah.
And this isn't necessarily what you're getting at, but I do think it really makes one wonder, like, well, if their ambitions are global, what kind of world do we want to see? And what kind of world are we trying to build, right? That presents like an alternative vision to the horror that they have all of us living through right now. So that's how I think of it. If you want to have global impact, I think you have to do a lot of local organizing. And I think that's, I've always wanted to live in the Bay Area, and it's kind of a funny time to be here. But I really do like to think that like the work that we're doing can help people make sense of what's happening here in the Bay, and so that they feel empowered to make changes. So, yeah.
Yeah. And the work that you're doing at the Phoenix Project in particular, which is what I sort of know the most about and why I invited you and Jeremy on, is because of your work in investigating the money that's been flowing into these elections in San Francisco, and maybe also the East Bay. I'm not sure. Jeremy, let's go to you in terms of what you see in terms of money coming in and how that has either increased or decreased or what has happened over time. And I know you spoke about this in our last episode a little bit, but I just want to, reframe it for listeners again so that so they understand the context.
Yeah, thank you for having us back. I want to sort of start off by shouting out Ali Winston from the UK Guardian, who wrote that piece in collaboration with Will Jarrett from Mission Local. And we really, we were just launching as an organization that February of 2024 when that piece was coming out. And so we worked with Ali to help him gather his research together to make a really powerful and impactful piece, which he's then been able to use to extend analysis, as we have as well, onto the rising gray money network in Oakland over this last year or two. Also, for good coverage on the topic as well, you can check out Laura Jadid's piece with the New Republic. Also, yeah, working with her covering this rise of dark money in Bay Area politics and sort of coming out of San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, what we've seen over the last 5 years is a group of tech billionaires aligning with corporate real estate interests and the traditional right wing of the police departments and also business interests through Chamber of Commerce and otherwise and statewide business PACs to spend over $50 million in Bay Area elections to really make, sort of to what other folks have already talked about a little bit before me here, but make San Francisco into an example of the ways in which corporate interests can dominate local politics and recapture local politics. I think it's really important to understand that San Francisco, like you mentioned, traditionally considered a progressive city. One can argue if it's ever been a progressive city or not, but had a lot of progressive wins nonetheless between 2015 and 2020. between electing Democratic Socialists to local office, electing one of the most progressive, if not the most progressive district attorney in the country, who was a big advocate for restorative and transformative justice. Um, Also passing real estate transfer taxes to fund social housing, um, uh, and passing a number of tenant protections that all, many of which cut against either real estate interests, the police union's interests, the Police Officers Association, or other corporate interests in the city. And so they really worked hard to figure out a way to recapture San Francisco and figure out how much money they needed to spend in order to recapture the city and, being willing to write that kind of check. In terms of national significance, I think that, you know, uh, you can't I can't necessarily say that Trump was elected because of what they've done to San Francisco, but San Francisco definitely played a massive role in helping Trump get elected for his second term, specifically in the way into what Kevin was talking about, that San Francisco is used as a punching bag, and that was intentional. We cover in our most recent Doom Loop report that just came out a couple of weeks ago the ways in which the local right-wing influences and forces pushed forward a media narrative of San Francisco being a failed city because of progressives in office, and used that against the progressive movement in order to help, in talking about, crime, talking about houselessness, talking about drugs, what have you, but really making a statement on it to say, this is all because of progressives that have been elected, when in reality it's reflective of national trends in cities across the country from the 2020 to the 2023, 2024 period. Um,
Which means
Nonetheless,
like increased crime. I mean, the economy was faltering because of COVID. Is that what you're speaking to?
yeah, like
Yeah.
cities across the entire country saw a both massive dips in crime rates when the stimuluses were put into effect and there was lockdown. You saw violent crime rates drop incredibly, but even more so than that, you saw property crime rates drop dramatically, like some of the biggest drops we've seen the last 50 years over a short period of time. And then those crime rates turned around and re-spiked after the stimuluses stopped being given out, when unemployment rates really, when they stopped doubling up on unemployment benefits for people from the federal government to support state government unemployment programs, and all of a sudden people had, this massive unemployment kind of crisis with a lot of in-person jobs being that much more dangerous, or a lot of other jobs being moved to being over Zoom. So you had, this kind of national issue, in cities across the country where homelessness rates spiked and eviction rates spiked coming into the 2021, 2022 period. You also had unemployment rates spiking, and you had crime rates that then also increased at the same time. And that was happening regardless of how, liberal or conservative the cities were. No matter how tough on crime or soft on crime the district attorneys were, you saw crime rates drop and then crime rates rise. Um, for San Francisco specifically, they were able to, use it as a heightened example of this phenomenon, and
Mhm.
really, you had local pundits who were being supported by what we call this AstroTurf network, this network of billionaire-backed groups that were trying to make an example of the failures of progressive leadership. And so they were talking about that locally, but then also then being turned around and picked up by Fox News on the national level, which then used San Francisco at a bare minimum once a week as like the headline example of like the failure of Democrat-run cities, to the point where I went to my cousin's wedding in North Dakota and mentioned, oh, I'm coming from San Francisco. And the first thing people want to say, oh, how can you live in San Francisco? It's such a cesspool, because they're watching Fox News and they're seeing San Francisco in their living room at least once a week. And so and a lot of that, what academics actually, there's two great academics out of uh, UC Santa Cruz, I believe, who wrote a piece in July on populist revanchism, talking specifically about the way in which by using San Francisco as the example of a failed city, it was directly supportive of and helpful towards Trump's reelection campaign,
Wait,
including
populist, what,
it's
revanchism?
called populist, populist revanchism. I can put the article into the chat.
And what does that mean, revanchism?
How they define it essentially is like it's a politics of revenge. It's a revenge politic. And
Okay.
so, it's the rise of a populist movement in revenge against perception of progressive gains or Democrat left gains.
Well, that
Um,
sounds very familiar.
right.
I
And
feel like,
so, and these two
mm,
academics, and I should get the name for you before the end of this recording, essentially track how, in this very similar way to our Doom Loop report as well, we were working together on this, but we reached the same conclusions
mhm,
about how this network of conservative-backed nonprofits, Neighbors for a Better, with these kind of innocuous names like Neighbors for a Better San Francisco,
mhm.
Grow SF, Together SF, Connected SF, what have you, how they were essentially, pushing forward this revenge politic of like, oh, we need to take the city back from the left. We have to take the city back from the progressives, and how that was directly then used towards Trump's talking points of we need to take the country back from the failed left. We need to take the country back from the failed, Democratic leadership that's led
Right.
us into this abyss. And look at San Francisco as an example.
Yeah. So when you send me that article, I will include it in show notes. What's the publication?
I believe that it's available for online download for free from Wiley Publications.
Okay. Gotcha.
But yeah,
Gotcha.
two professors out of UCSC.
I mean, what occurred to me while you were talking is it's also been the whole state of California, the whole state of California, which is obviously one of the largest states with the largest economy of any state in the United States, the fourth largest economy in the world. If they can bring us down, they can bring any blue state down, is probably what they're thinking. And we are funneling water, fresh water into the ocean for no good reason. And we are for these are the things that are said, and that the homelessness is out of control, sort of bypassing the fact that we have one of the most temperate climates in the nation. So it's actually easiest to live here if you are unhoused. And so many other things. I'm also thinking about Governor Newsom, who's vying, I think, to be a candidate in 2028 for president, and Harris, who came from California as well as the district attorney, I believe, in San Francisco, and then the attorney general for the entire state. So here's how you can kill a lot of birds with one stone here, is just by bashing California and bashing San Francisco. Now, let me just quickly say that you are listening to KSQD and KSQT in Prunedale 90.7, 89.7, 89.5 FM throughout the central coast of California and the Monterey Bay. Many voices, one station. We are talking to several people, researchers, reporters, and podcasters, journalists, and writers who have been watching San Francisco and the East Bay for some time, and the Tech Broligarch takeover of that city. I want to go to D. Scott Miller, who also has been a journalist for some time and is currently living in the East Bay. We have talked before, and I'm linking to these past shows to our show notes, about Black flight out of San Francisco. So you have people talking about housing. We're going to have cheaper housing, more affordable housing by building more housing. And you would then think that the city would become more multicultural and not less. I don't think that's what's happening, but you've talked about that and the culture of San Francisco changing dramatically with this tech bro takeover. And so I'm wondering if you can also speak to the relevance, of course, of what you think is important about what's happening here and why other people should pay attention. But I was wondering if you could speak to that part as well.
I think if you're going to talk about Black flight, it wasn't really Black flight. That actually began in the 1970s with the Redevelopment Agency in the Fillmore. So basically, during the 40s and 50s, the Fillmore and the Western Addition were known as the Harlem of the West. There was a large enough Black population from people who were working at the shipyards during World War II in Hunters Point. Most of those people were recruited and from places like Texas and Alabama, and they started at first they lived around the shipyards in Hunters Point. So that at the time was the concentration of where Black people were. But then as they gained more money and more access, they started buying homes in the Western Addition and the Fillmore. In the 1970s, San Francisco determined that it was a slum. Now, I personally think that that was actually because there was such an influx coming from the music scene and the culture scene of the jazz era in San Francisco at the time. There actually was a threat of San Francisco actually becoming a 50-50 kind of city where it was going to be like, of course, I mean, there's going to be a larger number of Black people in those communities. So basically what they did was they went and they raised the whole town. They gave people vouchers telling them that they were going to be able to move back in once the new houses were made. They didn't honor those vouchers. They essentially just broke treaties for decades. And so there wasn't really a Black flight. It really was more like a systemic pushing out of the Black community, the consolidation of schools and taking those schools and putting them in places that were not within the Black community, which caused a lot of people to be like, okay, well, I'd much rather go and move someplace where the schools are closer. I'd much rather go someplace where I don't have to catch 2 buses to go to school. So a lot of those people came and moved over to Oakland. So, I mean, it wasn't really so much of a flight as it was a push. And that push continued until just recently. So basically, in say like 2008, 2009, the Black population in San Francisco was 13%. It now hovers somewhere between 3 and 4%. That was by design. And so the anti-Blackness of the push of San Francisco, I mean, and there's 2 parts of this. The other problem is that San Francisco actually moved from being like a more of a tourist focused economy to a tech focused economy. And so every time those tech bubbles burst, what the tech would do was go back and blame the culture, right? So what we're actually dealing with are the consequences of the tech booms starting in the late 90s. But every time, like for example, San Francisco gave tax breaks to Elon Musk and to Twitter and to Facebook, and a bunch of tech people moved in because of those tax breaks. They were like, but then they moved out, right? This is even before the pandemic actually hit. And once the pandemic hit, they were all gone. So what we had a cultural vacuum and a whole bunch of space that was actually being lost because we gave up the commons to tech, thinking that tech was going to increase our revenue in San Francisco, or their revenue. I haven't lived there in a long time. But essentially, every time tech screwed San Francisco, tech would come back and blame somebody else. And that's the cycle. That's the cycle that we're seeing in San Francisco, is that San Francisco has this cycle where every time tech does something that screws over San Francisco, another tech industry comes in and says, no, that's not what happened, but we can save you. And so basically what we're dealing with the blowback coming from when Twitter abandoned San Francisco. Right. And so basically what happens is now we're just saying, no. It wasn't that. It was the progressives, which is the same thing they did before. And now they're saying AI will save you. But it's the same people making the same argument. Like they gut the city, then they say they're going to come and save the city. And so that's kind of like this weird game that San Francisco been playing with billionaires, even when there's no such thing as billionaires. They were doing that when they were multimillionaires. This is what they've been doing. The tech guys have always kind of like been rug pulling San Francisco. And San Francisco allows that rug pull to happen over and over and over again. And every time they give up public space, they give up public services, they give up public schools, and they continue to allow themselves to be privatized on a promise. And so we're seeing that again right now with AI. I hadn't driven a car over the bridge in like a decade. I usually just catch the BART, so I'm always underground. So I did that about 3 weeks ago for a talk actually on the network state. And it was all AI billboards. I'd never seen anything like it. There's no like, go to McDonald's or have a Coke and a smile. Nothing. It was all AI billboards.
I know. I saw one. I was driving to San Francisco and one said, it used to be that your hyper caffeinated tech engineers would be in charge of security, but now AI. I'm like, is that really supposed to be appealing to anybody? Like, tech engineers getting fired for AI?
Yeah, so the network state also, I mean, like the network state, I feel is always an extension of that broken promise that tech made San Francisco in the 90s. It's a continuation of that broken promise. And so,
I want to circle back to that. I want to circle back to that because people don't know what the network state necessarily is. We did mention it at the top of the hour, but the network state, let's go to someone who hasn't, Kevin. network state defined? And then what, D. Scott, I wanted to go back to the YIMBY movement. And, I think I said black flight. I think I used the wrong term.
Yeah.
Reverse that.
Yeah.
Let Dee talk about network state and I'll talk about YIMBYs.
Okay, all right. So go ahead. Tell people what the network state is from your words. We've talked about it a little bit, but I'm wondering, like, where is that now? They lost in Solano, from what I understand, where they were trying to buy all this land to create their own little network state compound. But tell people what that is and where it's at now.
Well, okay, I'd first like to refer. I think Gil is going to do a great job with the book, The Nerd Reich, which was just released. But there is also a website, and it's called vcinfodocs.com. vcinfodocs.com. And it kind of sets the groundwork for all of the explanations of the network state internationally. And so basically with the network state actually has several pronged things that they want to get done. The first one being they want to replace all governments with technocracy. They don't want to have presidents, they want to have CEOs. They also want to have their own power centers. So basically, when we're talking about these data centers are just a blueprint for something else they want. They want to be off the grid. And the only way they can be off the grid is by siphoning off of the systems that are already in place. So when people don't want these data centers coming in, that data center is supposed to end up being the center of their town. Right. So when you see a data center, like right now, Elon Musk is trying to put a data center in Memphis. And the people of Memphis are actually going against Elon Musk for that, because he's using a whole lot of the water. He actually is sucking up the resources to run the data center. But essentially, if they allowed that to happen, that data center would end up being the center of their network state town. So that's happening not just in this country, it's happening all over the world.
Okay,
so
wait, hang on. Let me just catch it up with you, because people are going to listen to this who haven't been doing the research or reading, and they're going to say, what? No, that sounds crazy, right? And yet we know from Gil Duran's reporting, and actually tech people literally saying these things out loud and speaking them and writing about them, like Curtis Yarvin and Balaji and so on. We can put all these links in episode notes, but what you're saying is, so the data centers that are sucking up all this energy and getting water rights, even if they fail, then they still have the energy. Is it like, okay, we want the energy and the water rights? It sounds like that's what you're saying. Like, we want to have those. And then whether or not the data center continues, we will be able to build a network state city.
Yes, that's essentially what it is. Oh, so basically, the whole concept is to siphon off of existing systems and build parallel systems next to them. Right. And then overcome those parallel systems. Okay. And who's going to, and I know, but tell our listeners, who's going to live in those cities? Who are they hoping will live in those cities? Well, basically, it's going to be, they're basically what they call towns. What do you call those things? Like company towns. Thank you. They're company towns. Mm-hmm. They're basically company towns. So what they want to do is they want to hire, like we almost got one in Oakland. Elon Musk had his eye on West Oakland as a site to do this. And so basically he was going to have his employees move into the houses in West Oakland, use our BART station as a way to transport those people from San Francisco and back to Oakland, San Francisco back to Oakland. But those people are going to be in a company town. And the other way that they can actually ensure this company town, and this is one of the international problems, is that they have to collapse the dollar. They have to collapse the dollar of any country they're going to go into. They want to turn it into crypto or Bitcoin or something that actually is not regulated by that country, right? So the destabilization of the dollar is a part of this overall dynamic. And then, of course,
and why is that? Because then we don't have financial independence.
Well, yeah. Well, they can actually start handing out scrip again, and that scrip is actually what the money was at these towns and coal mines, where in place of money, you would actually be given money as issued by the company. But you can only spend at the company store or to pay the company's rent. Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So wow. Okay. It's like everything old is new again in that regard. But at the same time, they're also like trying to figure out ways to override medical facilities. Public medical facilities. They want to privatize everything. So that company town, you are trapped there, right? They own your car, they own your money, they own your food, they own your house. And if you're not obedient to the company that you're working for, they can just take it and throw you out. right? So essentially,
Well, then they'll put you in a work camp in Utah.
yes, exactly.
Which is what's being built right now, is a work camp in Utah for people, as I understand it, who are unhoused, who don't have I mean, okay. So let's go to Kevin, if that's okay.
All right, one more thing though.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
They've attempted this in Honduras. They've attempted this in Argentina.
Yeah.
They've attempted this in Venezuela. And so like you have to look up Prospera in Honduras, where they're actually doing eugenicist experiments as we speak. Illegal eugenicist experiments as we speak.
What do you mean by that? What kind of experiments?
Well, one of them being they're trying to determine the race of a child. They're trying to determine the genetic predisposition of a child. They're actually over there doing gene splicing and stuff like that,
right,
on possibly human subjects.
Right.
Possibly.
Yeah. It seems like they don't want to be subject to regular, physics and natural forces that affect the rest of humanity. They want to cheat death and create some kind of a master, race, which, we've heard, we know that story and where that ends. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, you wanted to talk about, I forgot, what was it going to be?
YIMBY.
YIMBYism.
YIMBY, yeah.
Yeah,
So YIMBY. Now, this is important for our city because we are pro-YIMBY, as our centrist Democrats would say, and they believe, and they're hitting their RENA numbers, they're hitting their, all of that, and they've got the backing of, these young, also tech people who live, who work in tech and so on and so forth. So tell us how YIMBY, this is what I was confused about, because the Black population has gone down in San Francisco recently, and so YIMBY was supposed to help with for everyone to have housing.
Yes, but it does not. It's actually a libertarian movement started in 2017 by a well-known libertarian activist named Sonia Traus. It was initially called SF BARF.
Yeah,
but clearly that's not a good acronym. Doesn't really sell it. But yes, in my backyard, that's catchy. And one of the first investors was, I forget his name, but the CEO of Yelp. And basically, it's just all about, building and building, no regulations on anything they want to build. I mean, they want to take away the amount of stairwells that are required, affordable housing requirements. Forget that. They just, oh, thank you. Jeremy Stoppelman was one of the first investors in the YIMBY movement. But it's basically because you're seeing more and more this investment strategy with equity funds in buying up housing. Honestly, they're looking for all the passive income they can find, and so much of it is speculation. But what holds them back? Well, local ordinances, local neighborhoods, people who care about their neighborhood. They care about the character, which is a disgusting word in the YIMBY land. It's honest. Neighborhood character. Why should you care? You should turn everything into Tokyo or Singapore, even though some people just like houses and single family homes, even though they have such a powerful network of influencers pushing ideas like single family homes are racist, single family homes are bad for the environment. And honestly, I mean, I want to have people live here. I'm not trying to be xenophobic or anything, but I also too, don't want to have everything tear down. Especially, what are they targeting? They're targeting rent control. Any rent control units. So a big discussion going on right now in San Francisco is Mayor Daniel Lurie's family zoning plan. Now, there's already reports that it's not going to meet the desired goals set by the state, thanks to State Senator Scott Wiener. But still, they're pushing for it because it's upzoning. And a part of that upzoning is removing rent-controlled units. It's basically anything like 2 or less. They want to be able to remove that and be able to put bigger buildings. And why is that? Well, for one, if you don't have rent control, you have all the power over the tenants, and you can just keep up. I mean, it's like a small percentage, but you can still just keep upping the rent. And on top of that, too, you can extract more value out of the land by building bigger buildings. And that's the big thing. So much of what's going on is about creating passive income, and also, too, again, as we talked about with the network stake, more power over the workers. when the YIMBY movement published its manifesto, which you can still find on Substack, or no, or is it Medium? No, it's on Medium. In 2018, one of the first things they listed was about how living near your business makes your workers more efficient. And when you get into the people that are really pushing YIMBYism as well as these company towns, so much of it is about getting their workers to constantly work. And they'll set examples of like even when they're going to the cafe to get breakfast, they're networking, and then they're going and pitching and then working 18 hours a day or whatever. It's so much about squeezing the most out of their workers, especially in terms of their income, because again, like company towns, these YIMBY guys are all the tech guys, and they're the ones investing in the housing. So they're basically becoming the landlords of their workers as well, And it's not like, I mean, there was for a second there, Google was looking to provide its own like worker housing, which would have been a great idea, especially for the Silicon Valley. They could have done that. They have the capital to do that. But all those plans were shot down and left to real estate developers and speculators. Why? Because that's another way to get more money out of their workers. Mm-hmm. It's just it's almost when you get into it, you start sounding conspiratorial, but then you've seen how this is a plan that's been going on since the 90s. Honestly, if you look into new urbanism, I highly recommend everyone read a book called Capital City by Samuel Stein. It does a lot to show how powerful the real estate industry is and why everyone is going towards it and why it's becoming a bigger investment, because there's so much money in it. I mean, it's a $217 trillion industry. Trillions.
Yeah,
I mean, that's probably
one of the biggest lobbying groups in the state of California, which is a big state, a huge state with a lot of really expensive housing that people can make money on.
Exactly. And it's not just locals too. We should also add, real estate as speculation allows for foreign investment. And what was it in 2023? They found that it was 50 billion in foreign investment in real estate in the United States alone. I mean, that's insane, but that's what it's all about, and that's why you see over and over again, sure, they're complaining, we don't have enough housing, we don't have enough units, look, they're all full. But then you see these buildings and they're half empty. You can see it in the lights, you could see it, and you could even talk to the tenants there and they'll tell you, because they're just holding on to it. It's called land banking, and they're just waiting to sell it to somebody, probably foreign, somebody like that, Okay. It's just, yeah.
The YIMBY movement is part of our community here in Santa Cruz, California, and also really taking off nationally. The idea is that build more housing and people will be able to move in and housing will be more affordable. It's very sort of supply and demand in terms of its philosophy. Of course, there are a lot of areas like environmental impacts that are concerning neighborhood impacts. And then the idea of rent control pretty much goes out the window from YIMBY proponents. There's an overlap between YIMBY proponents and some of these tech oligarchs who are taking over San Francisco. Now, Jeremy, from the Phoenix Project, I wanted to go to you. The Phoenix Project has been tracking money, influence, and on San Francisco politics, and you've been probably watching the YIMBY movement as a part of this. Now, I have heard some arguments where it's like, yeah, maybe we should be building more housing, right? It seems like that might be a good idea, and it'll be cheaper than building social housing, is what I've also read. Of course, I would like to see more social housing or real subsidized housing. Jeremy, what do you think about this, the influence of YIMBY, and is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And what is it doing in terms of merging with these other power brokers in the Bay Area?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think one of the most telling parts about the YIMBY movement, maybe this is two parts here. First of all, as I kind of mentioned before, with the progressive movement and the power of the progressive movement between 2015 and 2020 in enacting, both having wins and also extracting concessions from corporate real estate and from some of the major power brokers in San Francisco. And it's no sort of surprise that the YIMBY movement as Kevin kind of mentioned, really gaining steam starting in 2017, in many ways launched as a reactionary pushback against the power and the success of the affordable housing movement and the community-based movements that were effective in being able to block massive either condos or relatively market rate expensive luxury housing in low-income, predominantly people of color districts such as like the Mission. I think in particular the fight around the Beast on Bryant or the Monster in the Mission, which were massive multi-year fights by community-based groups organizing to prevent and push back against gentrification happening in their neighborhoods. And fundamentally, they were pro-affordable housing. They were saying, hey, we're not against housing in our neighborhoods. Actually, that's the most necessary thing for confronting gentrification, but we need housing that we can afford, that actually prioritizes the people who currently live here and helps people stay in place and not be displaced. Um, of course, a massive market rate development does not do that, and only helps to hasten and further the gentrification and displacement of the people who call that neighborhood home, low income, working class, folks of color in particular. And so, so the YIMBY movement has been very, I think, effective as it relates to PR in pushing and shifting the narrative to say, oh, well, no, if you want a more affordable city or state, it's not about protections and affordable housing and keeping neighborhoods, keeping folks being able to afford to live in the neighborhoods that they live in. It's actually about just like pumping market rate and luxury housing. And maybe we'll give a little complimentary 10% affordable units for folks who make between 50 and 80% area median income, just to as an appeasement.
Which is about
If they have to.
$100,000 here, $110,000 here, 120.
Yeah,
I mean,
in San
90.
Francisco, it's
Yeah,
about $110,000 is the area median income, and so you'll have a handful of units that are for folks who are making between ostensibly $60,000 and $80,000 a year that they'll throw in there and say, oh, well, that's the affordable units, and you can apply to that through a lottery system, and we'll not have to deal with it. And the catch being as well that after I think it's like 35 years or so that those units ceased being affordable, that they go back to being market rate units for most of them. So, and that's part of the deal with a lot of affordable developments that have been constructed since HUD, since the Housing Urban Development federally stopped building affordable housing in 1981.
Hmm. Oh, let's go to Keen. I have a question about this idea of the wins of the progressive movement that then created this backlash in YIMBY. And what were those wins? Like, what are the solutions that you have seen that were working for people who were lower class, working class, let's say low middle class? What are the kinds of things that you were seeing and that you would like to see in San Francisco and in the East Bay too?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I consider myself as being a baby in the Bay. I've only been here since 2018. I feel like I've got like another 10 years to go before I can really start quoting personal history with some confidence. But when I got here, there were a series of elections. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Before 2019, I think it was Supervisors Marr and a couple others had been elected in San Francisco. But I think what it was, and this is lifted directly from, I think it was, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, it was like Sakin Argawal, like the GROW SF head, who said like 2019 was like his big moment when Shehzad was elected and Dean Preston were elected, that these folks realized they needed to like roll up their sleeves and start taking a much more active role in politics. So it's kind of funny. We didn't even get to the wins really from that recent round. I think just the mere presence of like an alternative way of imagining society was enough for these folks to see the writing on the wall and to really spur the creation of what we're up against right now. And I think that's a really good not frame, but a way to look at these folks. And I I would say that they are like market fundamentalists, basically, right? Who believe that the private sector is like the way to go. With the public sector is sort of like this unnecessary sort of fetter on development. And if you don't support the concepts that they are pushing or the vision that they push, then you're against the idea of human progress itself. And actually, you see that pretty obviously with the YIMBY movement, right? If you're not a YIMBY, it's not just that you're a NIMBY, you're anti-housing. You're against the concept of housing itself, which is a ludicrous thing to say. And I want to be clear when I say that that's not necessarily true for all of the supporters of this movement. I think that in a lot of cases, what it is that this is being put forward, especially in major sort of mainstream channels of communication, as the only viable way forward. And there's no space in the debate for anything else. And yeah, so I would say that it was probably some of those elections right before the pandemic that kind of kicked things into high gear. We didn't even really get to the wins. It seemed we were reeling from the pandemic, with all of the crime and the narratives around crime that were happening. That really kicked off this backlash.
Yeah, and Chesa Boudin, for those who don't know, was the progressive, I believe, DA elected in San Francisco, correct, who was interested in restorative justice. There were 3 school board members who were recalled at that time, and they were just trying to figure out how to get out of school closures and reopen the schools, and they were attacked by folks on Fox News and on right-wing, platforms. And these people sort of showed up. I think there was a couple that showed up who started all of a sudden showing up on these national television shows, news shows, who had just moved to San Francisco. They didn't even have their kids in the public school system. And so, yeah, it seems like this grassroots, these grassroots wins. So you're saying we didn't even have a chance. I mean, I guess what I'm asking too, and I want to get to this, and this can be for anybody now, I'd like to open up, the conversation and people can jump in, is, what are we talking about? Are we talking about rent control? Are we talking about building social housing? What are the fixes that you think the progressive community was wanting to get done in San Francisco and the East Bay and may still be wanting to get done?
Yeah, certainly in terms of housing, there was like a huge level of energy around tenant organizing in the city at that time. I think
Gotcha.
Also there were I'm trying to remember what was going on at the school district, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm drawing a blank right now.
Yeah, I know there was a sense of trying to integrate some of these schools, like Lowell School, which was a public school, but was a sort of a charter school, and people had to apply based on merit to get into a public school funded by public tax dollars. And so Allison Collins, who's on the school board, and others were saying, well, this is not fair. And in fact, I think the school board before them was saying it wasn't fair. And
it's
so
actually illegal. It was illegal. The admissions thing was illegal, and it was brought to court, and they were threatened in court that they needed to change it. So that was what the school board was doing.
Was actually trying to abide by the law. And so now what's happening with Lowell? This is my question. And also with, you mentioned the YIMBY movement, all these real estate tech people aligned together. I think we left it in the last show as they're looking at buying, and I think I've read this, they're looking at buying up the school properties now, public school properties. Is that right?
Yeah, that's why there's a lot of discussion about closures at SFUSD, and they're still pushing for it, even though parents are fighting back. Now, of course, Lowell is not in danger, but there's definitely other schools. And you can see it because some of those schools are on really nice property. I don't know if anyone's ever been to Sunset Ridge in Pacifica, but it is a nice piece of real estate. And so you get to see how does this happen? Well, that's the thing. Right now, they're just thinking about what they want, public facilities be damned.
Jeremy, last word for you before you have to go.
Yeah, before I jump off here. Yeah, so there's a huge overlap when we're looking at the funders behind the AstroTurf movement, this movement of, right-wing political pressure organizations that have been taking over San Francisco's politics and Oakland's politics. There's a huge overlap in forces that are not necessarily, one can call them strange bedfellows. And how they're all coming together to fight for what they see as more or less a hodgepodge of a collective vision. And one of the big forces that's consistent in that push are the charter school crowd, the pro-charter school crowd. And there's a big overlap between the real estate investor crowd and the tech and the real estate investor crowd and the charter school crowd. And you mentioned him by name before, William Obendorf, as being a great example of that. I mean, he was the director and founder of Neighbors for Better San Francisco. He also is the co-founder and director of the Federation for Children, which is a national charter school advocacy organization. He co-directed that with Betsy DeVos, former Trump pick for the Department of Education.
Wow.
And he's been in essentially half of the 11 people on the board. So about if you look at the board of Neighbors for Better San Francisco, half of the folks on the board are real estate developers. Including people like Nick Podell, who himself was the person behind the Beast on Bryant that we mentioned before, that was being pushed in the mission that was, ultimately had the rug pulled out from underneath it, and he's still very salty about that. So that's on one hand, and then the other hand, you have charter school advocates, national charter school advocates, and a number of these people, including folks, like Arthur Rock, were huge investors in the school board recall. Which, the school board recall followed by the DA recall were kind of the two first campaigns for the AstroTurf network and specifically for Neighbors for Better San Francisco. So, I think it's worth noting the fact that the charter school movement is a large underlying pressure point behind this AstroTurfing effort. Actually, even the terminology of AstroTurfing came from public school parents who have been pushing across the country against charter schools in their communities. It was a way to identify groups like Mothers for Liberty, which are, kind of puts forward a front of being just a bunch of neighborhood moms that care about their kids in their schools, but actually is backed by the Koch brothers and, push hard right wing, but also charter school, pro charter school ideology.
And that's something that I think Emily Mills revealed. Emily Mills is a citizen journalist who was saying that Moms for Liberty was sharing an ad, mailing a PO box with the Lowell Foundation folks. So, you see that connection right there. And if you talk to Democrats who know about Moms for Liberty, they say, "Oh my gosh, that's a terrible organization." And yet here they are somehow making inroads with quote unquote Democratic centrists. I don't know if Diane Yap, who was the head of the Lowell Foundation at the time, it was a Democratic centrist or not, because now she's on to the Manhattan Institute with Chris Rufo from Chris Rufo was the one, I think, who was pushing critical race theory as being the incarnation of Satan in our nation. Right. And the guy from California YIMBY was writing for Manhattan Institute.
Yep, Nolan Gray.
Nolan Gray, that's right. Nolan Gray.
And Chris Rufo also is a key cog behind the ending of affirmative action for college admissions nationally. So yeah, a bunch of people up in bed with each other in that way. But I'll leave it here on the fact that in Oakland specifically, OUSD, Oakland Unified School District, is the largest landholder of property in Oakland currently. And so kind of to get at Kevin's point there first, right before this, it's like they're kind of, you have a bunch of these developers who've been really gnawing at the bit to close down some of these schools and be able to tap into and access that what they would call undervalued land for massive profit.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. I know you have to go. Thank you for joining us.
I just want to add something real quick, though, too.
Yeah.
William Obendorf has admitted that he agrees with Milton Friedman that he doesn't think all schools should be equal. He doesn't think schooling should be equivalent for everyone, So just something to note with that as well.
Yeah. We've been talking to podcasters, journalists, and researchers who have been tracking the takeover of San Francisco and the Bay Area by the Tech Broligarchy, including folks like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and Mark Andreessen and people who you've never heard about, but people you have, like David Sachs and Sam Altman. And we are going to continue this conversation in our next episode. We have to sign off for now because we only have an hour. We wish we had 3 hours every show. If you appreciated this program, join us every first and third Monday at 6 p.m. for our live broadcasts, and then pick up our edited podcasts at Apple, Spotify, and at YouTube under the KSQD YouTube channel. has a podcast, Moment of Truth with Amy Chen Mills. It really helps to boost our program if you like, rate, and share our show at your favorite site and write a review. Visit our Substack, Moment of Truth Dispatch, for more on everything we talk about here, plus local politics and resilience and how local influences national and vice versa. Thanks to our entire team, Nyako Nyasu, Mei-Ling Obinata, Todd Zimmerman, and Joy Shandeldecker. Theme song by Zimmerman of Native Verse Studios, logo by Kathy Krizik, and thanks to the entire KSQD team on the California Central Coast. Shoot us an email at amy@ksqd.org with questions or comments. And remember, if we don't use our democracy, we lose our democracy.